Russia's war in Ukraine is increasingly blowing up in Moscow. This Ukrainian drone attack Sunday night bringing Russia's war hundreds of miles away into the heart of its own capital, shocking citizens.
My friends and I rented an apartment to come here and unwind, and at some point we heard an explosion and it was like a wave. Everyone jumped.
Attacks like this in Moscow becoming increasingly common. Last week, another Ukrainian drone hit a Ministry of Defense building, a psychological blow for a population repeatedly told by Putin's state media they are winning the so-called special military operation.
I was asleep and woken up by an explosion. Everything started to shake and the whole building had come down.
This weekend, Putin was keeping up the pretense everything is okay, celebrating Navy Day. But behind the scenes, his officials appear rattled by Ukraine's refusal to be beaten. Former President Dmitry Medvedev says if Ukraine's counteroffensive is successful, Russia will use its nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is dismissing the drone strikes in Moscow as an act of desperation. The defense minister calling them terrorist attacks. Reality, they've got Moscow's attention. Ukraine's president is hinting more of these strikes to come.
Ukraine is getting stronger. Gradually, the war is returning to the territory of Russia, to its symbolic centers and military bases. This is an inevitable, natural, and absolutely fair process.
Zelensky is stating what is becoming increasingly apparent. Ukraine is ramping up drone strikes inside Russia. In recent weeks, targets just over the border in areas vital to Russia's war effort have increased too. The impact even breaking through on Russia's state media. What is clear, Ukraine's fight on Russian soil is having effect. But can it really have an effect to sort of put political pain on Putin? That seems unlikely. You know, Ukraine may be able to puncture a little bit Putin's propaganda that everything's going well in the war, that if you're in Moscow, you're safe. But it's not going to deflate the message coming from Putin and from the Kremlin. Why? Because he still controls the narrative. The strikes are relatively small. There are not big casualties. In fact, very, very few casualties. It's structural damage so far. So it's not going to, at this time, I think, not going to really put a course correction in the way that Putin's fighting the war. It may even bring about a level of more specific retribution. But as we saw today, perhaps not just, you know, abstractly hitting Zelensky's hometown. Maybe there'll be intent behind it.
Nick Robertson reporting for us. Thank you. Joining us now, CNN military analyst, retired U.S. Major General Spider Marks, and CNN Russian affairs contributor Jill Doherty. General Marks, we're just getting word of a Russian attack on Kharkiv, right on the heels of the brutal attack on Zelensky's hometown. How much could this escalate right now?
Well, it could escalate, and I would tell you that what we're seeing in terms of Ukraine attacking targets inside Russia and deeply inside Russia into Moscow that are not military related, I think, sadly, are a waste of military manpower. Look, these are incredible weapon systems that the Ukrainians enjoy. I don't know that there's going to be much juice from the squeeze, if you will, in terms of threatening Putin. I think these weapon systems could be used more effectively, obviously, in their offensive in various places in the Donbass. So seeing the Russians attack into Kharkiv is a logical response. The best way for the Ukrainians to achieve some great success on the ground is not try to threaten Putin politically. He's got enough problems with that, and I don't know that they're going to be able to do it. But to achieve success tactically on the ground and send the messages back to these mothers back in Russia that their children are being killed because the Ukrainians are fighting them incredibly well in the various areas in Ukraine where they need to be.
Jill, I want to get your analysis as well. Take a look at this dramatic video of that drone strike on Moscow. You can hear terrified screams. How much of a psychological blow are these attacks inside Russia?
It's hard to tell precisely, Wolf, because Russian media, state controlled, have not been giving a lot of coverage at all to this. I've seen it mentioned in print stories, but really not on the TV media. But I think that is obviously one of the purposes of what the Ukrainians are trying to do. I mean, that place where the latest, where they hit, called Moscow City, they call it City. That is a financial center. It's really like the heart of Putin's capitalism. There are a lot of big companies there, and there are a lot of government offices in those high-rise buildings. So hitting them, I think, is very symbolic. I think that's what the Ukrainians wanted to do, and maybe they think that they can deflect, some of the weapons that the Kremlin would have to bring them back to Moscow to protect Moscow from further attacks like this by drones.
Interesting. Jill, how do you read Russia's latest nuclear threat against Ukraine?
Well, I mean, it's coming from the former president and who has been, the minion of President Putin now for years. And essentially what they're doing, it's kind of like good cop, bad cop. Putin, if you can call him a good cop, but he comes across as more rational, more, let's say, controlled in the way he speaks. But Medvedev, who is constantly on Twitter and other social media, is really, using brutal language, sometimes actually kind of unhinged, brutal language. And this is an example of it. I mean, he knows probably that Russia is not going to use strategic nuclear weapons and start a war. However, he can talk about tactical weapons, that it's all another attempt to intimidate the West. No question.
Yeah. All right. Jill Doherty, General Spider Marks, guys, thank you very much.